Hi, my name is Eric Linton. I'm a full-time artist, and today I'm going to be doing a little demonstration on how to do an understudy or a value study. I'm just going to be using a single color. It's burnt umber. I'm going to be doing this portrait of my daughter, and it takes maybe 45 minutes. It's a really basic process. You only need very simple materials. It's a great way to practice your values. It's also a great way to do an underpainting for a more finished painting. So I hope you can join me. And thanks for watching. All right, hi everybody. We're gonna be doing another portrait of my daughter today. And we are gonna start off with basically just the simple underpainting. So if you're not familiar with this process, it's a really simple way to get started with a painting or to do a study. And all I'm going to be using today is my burnt umber paint. And I'll be mixing that with a little bit of linseed oil. And I'll also occasionally use some solvent. I'm just using an odorless mineral spirit. And that just helps thin out the paints. And so this lesson is intended for, people who are still just learning and playing around with oils. But I also think that it's helpful for people who are more experienced as well to practice some of these basics. One of the benefits of this method is, let me make sure I don't have a glare on here. One of the benefits of using this method is to establish values. So values are basically just the range of light to dark. That looks better. So your darkest dark all the way to your lightest light, and you've got a range in between. Those are your values. So it makes it kind of a simple way to just in a single color. It's very simple to establish your values as opposed to trying to do it with a full color palette. And once you do that, it's very common to do your underpainting in a single color like burnt umber, and then add on top of it all of your colors once those values are established. So let's get started on this portrait today. And what I like to do to start off is to just look for the biggest shapes in the image. And I'm not worried too much right now. I'm really not worried at all about detail. What I want to just do is decide where things are going to be. So let's make this the top of the head here, got the back, we've got the bun. I'm not going to worry a whole lot about the bun. Face coming down here. And I kind of think about the shape of the skull as I'm doing this. Coming down to the jaw right there, or the chin. And then we've got the neck. She's got a long neck. And then the shoulder there. Okay. So those are our very basic proportions. And then I start thinking a little bit about the shapes as defined by the values. So separating shapes based on how light or dark they are. And so I'm just kind of splitting the head here by where the light's hitting, comes back here, follows the neck and shoulders. And again, I'm not at all worried about detail, just really establishing those different large shapes. So what I like to use for the biggest shapes is This is basically just a big eraser. It's a rubber pad. I like to use a variety of different materials, so you don't have to use exactly what I'm using. Just anything that allows you to push the paint around on the canvas is going to be great. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to lift off this paint to really block out those large shapes as defined by the light. So there is the bottom part of her head, and then coming down to the neck. And even though one of our focuses is values, I'm not at all worried right now about getting the values just right. Right now, it's just about the large shapes, breaking those up, simplifying things. Painting feels really overwhelming when you look at a blank canvas and you think of all the colors and the values and the anatomy and shapes having to be just right. But it feels a lot less overwhelming when you just think of it in a procedural way and something that just has kind of a simple process to it. And I'm a huge advocate for there being a lot of different ways to do similar things. So by no means are these rules, these are just simple guidelines that I have found helpful in my painting. But I love seeing people find their own ways to do things as well. And I don't always follow these steps either. Sometimes I just feel like trying something new. I might get tired of using the same methods over and over again. And I would say, honestly, almost every painting I do, there's some degree of experimentation. So all that to say, don't feel like as you're watching this, these are rules that you have to live by. So I'll really do my best to talk about things in general terms, and respect that you, the viewer, might recognize things that you like about this process and maybe also see things that you don't like so much. And just feel free to kind of have a buffet mentality where you can study art and different artists and pick and choose what you like. I think that's how every artist finds their voice. None of us are islands. All of us are benefiting from our associations or our knowledge of artists who've come before us. The history of art is us just learning how to borrow what we like from other artists and then find a way to make it our own. Okay, so there's kind of our basic shape. I will definitely be modifying this significantly as we go on. But we've got a good start. I also, I like to give myself liberties to interpret certain things that I like or don't like. So I might put things in that aren't there or take things out that are there in the reference photo. And I think that's also what makes art unique and good, is that an image is going through the filter of the artist's brain, and you get to have a little insight into what that artist sees and how they think. Okay, now very slightly, I'm going to start pushing these values back. And I think how I'll do that is I'll use this brush. So I'm using just a couple of different brushes. I have more brushes here than I'll actually use. So this is a Rosemary & Co. brush. It's called a long filbert. Filbert just means that it has this rounded tip to it. And I honestly don't remember what kind of hair this is. It might just be synthetic. And it really doesn't matter. Whatever feels comfortable for you. And I know artists who only use a single brand and they're loyal and very particular about only using specific kinds of brushes. And I know other artists who are amazing artists and they'll buy their brushes at Walmart. So again, art, one of the great things about it is there's not a lot of strict rules. And so I'm using these brushes, but don't feel like you need to have the exact same materials that I have to be able to do this. So speaking of rules, while there are not a lot of strict rules in art, there are some rules for certain types of effects. So I would say if you're an artist who likes to practice any kind of realism, if you're trying to do a portrait and you want it to look real, then there are certain rules that you want to know about, and they're pretty basic. And I think you could break them down to number one, the values. So you want to get these values right. The range of light to dark. That's more important than getting colors just right. And then if you want to have a good likeness, you obviously want to be able to find those shapes. And then if you want to have artistic effects, you want to know how to handle different edges. So some edges might be sharp, while other edges are a little bit lost. So those are some of the basic rules of realism, I would say. And that would apply to landscapes as well. So again, if you're watching this and you're thinking that doesn't look very good, that doesn't look very accurate, I'm okay with that at this point because I'm just kind of getting the basic feel for this portrait, deciding where things are going to go, and we will make it more accurate as we go on. A huge part of painting is being able to just step back and look at your painting. Sometimes I will take a break, and it always amazes me when I take a break and come back to my painting, it almost looks like a completely different painting. I see things that I did not see before. Like our tendency for bias in so many things in life is very high. And so when you're working on a painting, you're spending a lot of time on it, I think that our brain starts telling us like, yeah, that looks right, and don't worry about that. And then when we take a break and come back and see it with fresh eyes, it's just amazing to see how much we might have missed. So that's one thing I like to do as I'm painting. Just take a break. And along those same lines, I also always encourage myself and other people when you're painting to be very critical. You don't want to be too attached, too proud of anything you've done, so that you're not, to the point that you're not willing to change it. So I really try and be humble enough about my pieces that I'm always happy to change something that's not working with everything else. Even if that one particular thing I like, sometimes you gotta let it go to make everything else work together. All right, I'm probably getting too much into details right here, thinking about the job, but I'm just gonna kind of establish, there's a job line right there. Gonna soften that little shadow there. And all these things I'll probably go back over again and completely change, but for now, They're little placeholders. All right. Now, if you're looking at the reference photo, you see that the values, obviously we've got probably the highest value is going to be this part of her cheek and her jaw right there. And maybe on her earlobe right there. And underneath her ear, there's a really bright spot there. And then there's a total shift in values, so much darker up here, but still up here is going to be much lighter than the background. And so, I don't have to lighten this area up a whole lot because I'm considering how much more I'm going to push down the values in the background. In fact, maybe I'll do that right now. Again, just to really separate my shapes. And I'm also going to reshape the entire crest of the head quite a bit. And that's something that I don't see it as I failed to do it right the first time, since my initial passover was really just to get a feel, lay things down on the canvas, and just find those bigger shapes. So there's no problem with going back and correcting some of those bigger shapes, especially once you start getting more details down. It's kind of like you're creating a map, and the more information you have on the map, the more you're going to be able to see if there are mistakes. You're able to see like what is related to where. And so as I put more information down here, decide where that nose is, then I also have more information about where the top of the head's going to be. And so like right now, she's just got a giant forehead. And so I've got to reassess the shape of the head. And always, in order to find, the shape of one spot, you often have to look at other spots. So if for example, right now I'm looking at the forehead right there, but I'm comparing it to the overall shape, kind of ignoring the nose, but how the forehead lines up with the jaw. And so you kind of have this crescent shape. So I'm even just going to go down like this and kind of just make it a continual shape for the entire face. And then I'll go back and make some more distinguishing marks later. All right. Sometimes I'll just even get my finger in there if I'm feeling lazy and just want to lift some of the paint off. All right, so her eye's going to get a bit lost in the shadows. Those values are all very similar. And then again, we're going to those values on the top of her head are going to blend right in with the background. And so I don't need to worry about actually defining the very top of her head. Just giving intimations, making your mind as a viewer believe that the top of the head is up there, but not actually having to spell it out for you. That's something that I say over and over again as I'm painting, is you want to allow the viewer to take part in the creative process. And so the more you spell out, the more detail and the more you focus on, as a painter, explaining every little thing in the painting, the less you leave to the viewer to take part in the process of co-creating that image. And so it's almost like half of the process of the painting is done by the artist, laying down the paint and presenting the idea. But then the other part of creation in the painting is the person who's viewing it. And people like paintings more when, even subconsciously, their brain gets to take part in the creative process. And so that's why you see great artists. Like, I love studying how artists paint hands. Hands are these complex things, and we could get stuck in painting so much detail. But then you look at great artists like Zorn and Jonathan Singer Sargent. There's so many others who paint hands in such an abstract way that if you were just looking at the hand by itself, you might not be able to tell what it is. But when you see it in context of the rest of the painting, it looks almost perfect. And that's because you're allowing the viewer, you're allowing your own brain to take part in the creative process. And so your brain gets to create that hand out of just a few brush strokes. And I think that's such a beautiful part of art and poetry. Okay, so hopefully these shapes are slowly getting refined. We're slowly distinguishing one from another. And doing so mostly by finding the difference in values. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up and I'm going to start looking for the higher values. And that makes us kind of move into the next stage of looking at detail. So we've been avoiding getting too caught up in detail, but at this point I think we can start considering where there's more detail that we want to bring out. One of the things that I like to use is sometimes just a Q-tip. Q-tips can be a really great way to lift paint off the canvas. So here, I'm just looking for that lighter tone. It's right there on the jaw that we were talking about. Lighter value on the jaw, lighter value under the ear, on the earlobe here. Let's bring some out on the neck. Let's show the sternocleidomastoid mastoid. That's this tendon that comes down the neck. Let's show the light hitting right here as our body kind of rolls towards us. And just that simple, by being able to hit those few highlights, like it really starts coming to life. Our brain is taking in those details and almost telling us more of a story than what's actually on the surface right now. And I love that. Okay. So I also like to use, this is another little rubber eraser kind of tool. And this helps me really find some details. So it's perfect for something like this ear. I'm not gonna go for every little detail in the ear. That would really distract from everything else in the painting. But I do want to give the impression that there's a lot of detail there without having to totally spell it out for you. And then let's make a hard line here. So I'm looking right now at the shadow that the ear is casting. So this cast shadow has a pretty hard line underneath it right there, because we go from this dark of the shadow to this highlight right underneath it. And that kind of contrast usually needs a sharper line. I'll bring out just a few spots on this highlight on the cheek. And just like in the beginning of the painting, where I was saying I'm not too concerned about getting everything just right, we'll refine that more and more. Same thing right now, where I'm finding the light. I'm really trying to almost make little reminders for myself about where certain things are, but still nothing is permanent on here. I'm going to be, almost every one of these marks that I'm making right now, I'm going to be refining just a little bit. And I like giving myself that freedom and taking the pressure off myself. Because if I feel like everything I put down has to be just right, it really starts getting stressful and less playful. And since I know oils are forgiving, I can put down marks and know that I'm not married to them. I can change them as I go on. And so that's a lot of what I'm thinking as I'm putting things down, is thinking, okay, that's something to keep in mind. You know, this highlight or this shadow, that's something I want to be paying attention to. So I'm going to put this down, but I'm also thinking I'll come back around to that. I'll fix it up. I'll get it just right in a little bit. And that way it stays, for me at least, kind of fun. Looking at the angle of her ear hole there. Really right here, just lighten that whole area up. I don't want it to feel like there's a straight line down the ear. Again, I'll go back in. I'll add more detail in a minute. I took this photo just the other day. We were in our little reading room off the kitchen, and we recently painted it dark green. And it just is such a fun room to sit in, especially as in the evening light. It's so dramatic in there. And so she was sitting on the couch as we were talking, and she's used to me doing this, but I said, okay, you need to freeze, hold still, let me turn your head this way. And at this point, she doesn't need a whole lot of instruction. She almost just has a sense for where to put her face and how to turn her head, and it's really fun. And this girl too, I'm sure if she decides to stick with art, she'll be a much better artist than I am. She puts in the hours, that's for sure. She spends hours and hours and hours painting and drawing. Mostly cats and dragons right now, but I'm sure it'll turn into other things too. All right, I've got that nose way too big. looking for basic shapes. I'll refine it later. One of the important things when I talk about shapes, one of the things that I'm really looking at is the angles. So in order to get things to look right, like you really want to find what's the upturn angle of the nose, what's the angle of the upper lip. So I'm always kind of using my brush like this. If I'm looking at a model from life, I'm going like this to find those lines and angles, or I hold it up to my reference photos. It's a great way to get the correct angles. In fact, I'm gonna use this flat edge right here, since these are fairly straight angles. I'm gonna line it up with my reference photo, find the angle of that lip, and just notch it in like that. Now I'm gonna go find the angle of that upturned nose. I'm literally just lining it up with my reference photo and then bringing it back to my canvas. Look at that. So that easy to find the angle of the nose and then the lip. The shapes aren't exactly on yet, but that's okay. I'll refine that more and more. And honestly, sometimes if I'm not trying to get the exact look of a specific person, I might put a mark down and just love the way it looks and just leave it. And so the painting ends up becoming a completely unique individual rather than like a copy of exactly what I'm referencing. But in this case, I want to get a close representation of my daughter. So I'm going to try to stay pretty true to what I see. All right, let's get the angle of that lower lip. There we go. Now we can push that cheek forward. It's a little bit too far back. And then I'm gonna find the angle on the forehead. Push those values back down just a little bit. Don't want to get too light in there. And then I'm going to angle the shadow down a little bit more. Check my lines, make sure I'm not having too harsh of a line right there between the cheek and the shadow that's separating the cheek and the nose. I want to make sure that's not too harsh. So you can see by now that I'll make a mark, I'll leave it for a second, and I go back and I hit it again. And I honestly just do that over and over again. There's nothing wrong or shameful in that. I'm not embarrassed about it. If people like Sargent and great artists of the past can spend time fretting over the same spot over and over again, I feel like I can too, so. Get more paint on there. Yeah, I like that better. Now the forehead's not bulging. It's interesting. I always find painting strangely stressful and relaxing at the same time. Sometimes a painting is just a fight and you just have to battle until you win. Other times it just flows so naturally, it's like you just get lost in the painting and time flies and you finish just feeling so good about yourself. Those are great days, but I would say those are the exceptions. I feel like it's very common that I have to really just fight to get it to work. But that fight also is very satisfying. It's very satisfying when you put in that time and effort and can walk away at the end being proud of what you've put down. Proud of creating something totally new in the world that didn't exist before and that will most likely live longer than you do. That's a cool feeling. Okay. Now let's consider her shirt. I'm going to ignore all the detail on the shirt for the most part. I mean, I'll put in some of the basic wrinkles and things like that, but I don't like putting in logos and all that kind of stuff. And I'm gonna try and keep it fairly abstracted. My paint's getting a little dry, so I'm gonna add some linseed oil just so I can push around the paint a little bit, see how much nicer it goes down now. And I'm gonna thin it out a little bit, so I'm taking the thicker pigment, kind of washing it out with the oil, and so I have less pigment on the brush. That's another way to play with your values, bring your values down, 1 or 2 shades instead of 10, so. Then, if I really wanted to make the wrinkles pop on there, I might use something like this. Instead, I'm going to actually lift off paint with my brush, so they're more subtle transitions. And it's not forcing me to be so stark with my value changes. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to go back in now and hit the lower values. Okay, I'm getting to the point now for an underpainting. We're almost there. So I don't need to put all the detail in. This is a pretty effective underpainting because it serves the purpose of helping me see the range of values. It has given me 95% of the shapes that I need to create an effective painting. And so really, if I want to finish this, it can either serve like this as a study or just like more of a, I don't know, an old feeling painting or study. You could just leave it like this. But I want to take it to the next stage and show you guys how to do color on top of this. So we're pretty much there as far as just an underpainting. So everything like the texture of the skin and all the brush strokes, not super worried about that yet. That's something we'll do when we put on all of the layers of color, and I'll be thinking more about my strokes and getting my edges done correctly. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this as a start. Or if this was a study, I'd feel more prepared to now work on a next finished painting. But just fun to work on something that goes so quickly. I feel like it keeps my brain entertained and active, and I always feel like it's a fun exercise to do these. And as I was saying in the beginning, I feel like this is something that you can practice as a beginning artist all the way to a more advanced artist, because these are skills that you're always going to need, and I feel like you can never be good enough at them. You can never be too good. And so studying values and just kind of like an athlete would every once in a while go back and work on the basics of dribbling and free-point shooting. I think it's always very helpful for artists to do little studies and try and focus on different areas to make their paintings a little bit better. So I'll leave it at that. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys, and thanks for watching.